Welcome back to the podcast, Dream Doers. I am so glad you're here. And today I want to slow this episode back down because this is not something you want to rush through. This is not a highlight reel. This is a conversation from my heart. This message is not coming from insecurity or self-doubt. I'm confident in who I am. I don't carry toxic shame. I don't question whether I'm worthy of the calling on my life, but what I do carry is weight. The weight of responsibility for my family, responsibility for the people connected to my work, responsibility for the ripple effect leadership always creates. I care deeply about people and I care about peace. I care about wisdom and about building things that last longer than applause, likes, or a single season of success. And I don't believe recklessness is the same thing as courage. But I also know this to be true. Silence has a cost. There comes a moment when staying quiet is no longer wisdom. It becomes avoidance. When shrinking back is no longer humility, it becomes fear wearing a disguise. And that moment is where so many dreams go to die. If you've been around for any length of time, you know that I cannot stand mask wearing. I cannot stand disguises. Let's let down our masks and talk real for a second, please. This episode is for the person who knows they are capable of more, called to more, entrusted with more, but has been paralyzed by fear. Maybe fear of public opinion, fear of being misunderstood or being criticized, fear of what stepping into leadership, entrepreneurship, or advocacy might cost. And we need to say this clearly. The fear around speaking up, building something visible, or leading boldly today is not imaginary. It's informed, it's rational, and it's real. People don't hesitate because they lack conviction. They hesitate because they are paying attention. We have watched journalists lose their lives, advocates silenced, leaders threatened, families harassed, moms get children taken away just for advocating, businesses destroyed, people dragged publicly, mocked, canceled, or made examples of, words twisted. This is not ancient history. This is present day. So if you've paused before starting that business, before building that dream, before filing the nonprofit paperwork, before attaching your name to a mission or a message, that pause does not automatically mean your fear is winning. Sometimes it means responsibility is present. Leadership today doesn't just affect you. It affects your spouse, your partner, your children, your employees, your clients, your community. When people say, just be brave, they often forget that bravery today can put other people at risk. Wisdom is not cowardice. Wisdom is stewardship. But here is where the line gets crossed. Fear becomes a problem when it starts making decisions for you, when it edits your message, when it delays your obedience, when it convinces you to shrink what God has you to steward. That's when silence stops being wisdom and starts becoming disobedience. Go back and listen to what I just said again. That is so huge to pay attention to. And this is where dream doers live. Every dream, every business, every nonprofit, every mission-driven idea eventually reaches a moment where staying small feels safer, but growing feels necessary. And the tension in that moment is rarely about money. It's about visibility. Visibility brings opinions, growth brings scrutiny, expansion brings commentary, and here's the part that no one prepares you for. The more aligned you become with your purpose, the more you step into your purpose, the more resistance seems to appear out of nowhere. You don't just get critics from obvious places anymore. You get them from strangers. You get them from acquaintances you knew 23 years ago in high school that comes out of the woodworks to rip you apart about your mission simply because you don't believe in the same political views as them. That happened to me this week. This happens from people you've never met, from people who don't understand your heart or your story or your mission, from people who project their own fears onto your courage. These are the internet trolls. This is why so many dream doers never even begin. The dream dies before it ever has a chance to breathe. Dreams rarely die loudly. They die quietly. They die in notebooks. They die in conversations that never even happen. They die in ideas that never make it past fear. History tells us this story over and over again. Every meaningful shift has faced resistance. Not polite disagreement, not mild discomfort, real opposition. We romanticize history because we get to look backward from safety. But in real time, the people we now quote and admire were considered dangerous, divisive, aggressive, and threatening. All labels I've experienced from my own closest people in my personal life the last 5-10 years. But Martin Luther King Jr. was not celebrated while he was alive. He was surveilled by the government. He was jailed repeatedly. His home was bombed. His family was threatened. His words were twisted. His motives questioned. Even people who agreed with him asked him to slow down, to wait, and be less disruptive. Does that sound familiar? Do you know how many times in my own life people who were once what I considered to be mentors or close people in my life have come to me and said, hang on, wait, no, don't speak up, don't do that, don't say that, don't advocate. But Martin Luther King understood exactly what his obedience might cost him, and so do I. And he continued anyway, and so will I. Not because he didn't feel fear, but because the mission outweighed the fear of public opinion. That's huge. Change has always required people willing to be misunderstood. Now let's talk about David, because David's story is one of the clearest examples of being publicly dismissed for appearing ill-equipped. David is someone who has been mentioned many times in the Bible. They just came out with a movie about David's life. If you want to take your children and you to go see it, it's so uplifting and so empowering. But David is not a warrior when his story begins. He's a shepherd. He's overlooked, underestimated. When he shows up to the battlefield, his own brothers mocked them. Saul doubts him. The soldiers laugh at the idea that he could even fight a giant or fight anyone. He doesn't have armor. He doesn't have the experience. He doesn't even look the part. And this is where so many people get stuck today. You don't look like what leadership is supposed to look like. You don't sound what authority is supposed to sound like. You don't have the credentials people expect. David refuses armor that doesn't fit him. He refuses to become someone else to be taken seriously. He shows up authentically as himself, armed with faith, obedience, and trust in God, period. And that is what allows him to triumph. David's victory does not come because public opinion changed. It came because obedience stayed stronger than fear. Job's story takes this even deeper. Job did everything right and still lost everything. His wealth gone. His children were gone. His health was gone. His reputation gone. And then came all the voices, friends who blamed him, people who questioned him, people who insisted there must be something he did to deserve it. I felt so much of that when I began to tell the truth about my story. And even until today, people have questioned what I'm saying. I have nothing to fear and nothing to lose. I only know my story to tell. And people still don't believe me. I have been interrogated. I've been questioned. I've been called names. People have told me to just get over things. But there is a bigger mission behind what I have gone through. And there's also a bigger mission behind my businesses and the legacy I'm leaving for me and my children. Back to Job. Job teaches us a truth we don't like to sit with. Obedience does not come with guarantees of comfort. Sometimes obedience is followed by loss. And personally, myself, I felt like so many things were lost to me because what I had thought my life would look like was playing out differently. People and things were leaving, and to me, it felt like I was losing. when honestly God was just equipping me to step into the bigger purpose that He has for my life. I felt a lot like Job in the Bible. But Job refused to abandon his integrity. He refused to curse God. He refused to let suffering rewrite who he was. And while restoration eventually came, the real transformation happened in the middle, in the waiting, in the silence, in the faithfulness when no one was applauding. Scripture is full of people who felt ill-equipped. I said it 1,000 times this last decade of my life. I just didn't feel equipped. Moses argued with God and said he couldn't speak well. Gideon believed he was insignificant and hid in fear. Jeremiah said he was too young to speak. Esther was terrified to approach the king. Mary risked her reputation to carry a calling bigger than her life. Peter failed publicly. Paul had a past he could not erase. God has never waited for confidence. He waits for willingness. And if God is calling you, He already accounted for your fear. Now, I want to speak directly to the person who has not started. You have the idea, you have the vision, you feel the pull, but you keep telling yourself, not yet. Not yet because you don't want to be misunderstood. Not yet because you don't want criticism. Not yet. You don't want conflict. That's the people pleasing in us. What you are really saying is, I don't know if I can survive the opinions that come with visibility. But staying invisible does not protect you from hardship. It only protects you from impact. Entrepreneurship for many of you is not about money. It's about freedom, legacy, breaking cycles, creating something your children can look at and say, they didn't quit when it was hard. Starting a business or nonprofit in today's climate takes courage, friends. You will be judged, I promise you. You will be misunderstood. You will be criticized, but you will also grow. You will also stretch. You will also discover strength you didn't know you had. This is where warriors are formed. Not warriors who attack, warriors who endure. Warriors who stay focused, who build quietly while others criticize loudly. Hate is loud, but it is rarely wise. Most criticism comes from people who are not building anything at all. Your job is not to respond to every voice. Your job is to stay focused on the people who you are serving. I had a really good friend a few years ago say, Jana, God is going to send people in your life who are going to give you kind, constructive criticism. He's not going to send outside voices of hate and scrutiny and fear. He's not going to do that. Jesus himself was misunderstood, criticized, and then ultimately murdered, crucified. He did not stop his mission to defend himself, and now I want to call you forward. If God places a dream in you, it is because someone needs what you are called to build. If you feel that pull to start, it is because people are waiting on the other side for your obedience. So you do not need permission from public opinion. Be the warrior that your family will one day thank you for. Build the legacy that outlives your comfort. Choose obedience over approval. God doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called, and He equips them as they move. This is your moment. This is what it means to be a dream doer. Think about anyone who's trained for any kind of Olympic sport. Do you think that that came without injury, without actual blood, without actual tears, without criticism from coaches and people who just didn't think their body type was right or they didn't have it in them and scrutinized everything about what they did? These people who become the best, who make change, who advocate and break records, and people who build dreams and shift and change the way that our world functions are people who've been brave enough to put the hate and put all the unwelcomed constructive criticism that's not even constructive aside and say, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to move anyway. They stayed in their lane. They stayed in focus. They put their head down. They grinded. They responded where needed. They grew where needed. They evolved. They changed. They became the very best version of themselves so that they could pave a new path. So before we end this episode, I want to stay here longer because this is the part most people are not warned about when they feel called to build something meaningful. When you start to step into your purpose, when you finally stop shrinking, when you stop hiding your voice and you begin to move forward in obedience, something strange happens. Opposition increases, and it often comes from places you never expected. People will come from the woodworks. They'll come out of nowhere who have never even spoken to you before. People who do not know your heart, your story, your intentions, or the countless hours you have spent praying, planning, and wrestling with the weight of what you are building. They still feel entitled to an opinion. And those opinions are not always neutral. They are often sharp, dismissive, and sometimes even cruel. And let's be honest, they're usually cruel. This is the moment where many people stop. Not because they no longer believe in the mission, but because they were not prepared for the emotional and spiritual weight of being seen. Visibility changes things. When you're hidden, people project nothing onto you. But when you're visible, people project everything. What they project is rarely about you. It's about their fear, their insecurity, their frustration with their own lack of movement. Your obedience becomes a mirror, and mirrors make people uncomfortable. This pattern is not new. It has always existed. Every person we now celebrate as a leader, advocate, or world changer faces intense resistance in real time. Martin Luther King Jr. was not universally admired when he was alive. He was deeply disliked. He was surveilled, jailed, threatened, and constantly criticized. Even those who agreed with his message often told him his timing was wrong, his tone was too much, or his presence was disruptive. Yet he continued, not because he enjoyed opposition, but because the mission mattered more than being liked. Rosa Parks did not make her decision in a vacuum. She understood the cost. She understood the danger. She knew that refusing to comply would affect her livelihood and her safety. She chose obedience anyway. Malala spoke knowing it could cost her everything, and it nearly did. David walked into a battlefield where even his own brothers mocked him. Job stayed faithful while being accused, blamed, and misunderstood by those closest to him. This is what obedience often looks like. It is not applauded at first. It's questioned, scrutinized, challenged. And this is where I want to speak directly to the dream doer who is afraid of the comments, the messages, the whispers, and the criticism. You do not need to respond to every voice. You do not need to even defend yourself against people who are not invested in your mission. You do not need to convince strangers of your calling. Jesus did not stop to answer every accusation. He did not chase public approval. He stayed anchored to his assignment. That is wisdom. That is strength. When hate shows up, it's an invitation to compartmentalize, not to suppress your emotions, but to place voices where they belong. The voices of those you are called to serve deserve your attention. The voices of those who are projecting fear please do not forget that. The more you step into alignment, the more resistance you may feel. This does not mean you're wrong. It often means you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Darkness does not protest light that stays hidden. I want you to hear this clearly. Staying silent will not protect you from hardship. It will only protect you from impact. You can avoid visibility and still face pain. The difference is whether that pain is attached to purpose or avoidance. For those of you who feel called to start a business, a nonprofit, or a mission-driven platform, understand this. Entrepreneurship is not just a career choice. For many of you, it's obedience. It is legacy work. It is breaking cycles. It is building something your children will point to and say, they were brave when it was hard. You will be misunderstood. You will be judged. You will be criticized, and you will also grow. You will stretch. You will develop resilience and clarity that only comes from movement. So if the hate has kept you frozen, let this be your permission to move anyway. Let the mission outweigh the fear. Let obedience be louder than public opinion. Glow anyway. Build anyway. Speak anyway. History does not remember the people who commented from the sidelines. It remembers the people who moved. And that is what you are being invited to do now. I want to go even deeper here because I know exactly who is listening to this episode, and you're not lazy. You're not unmotivated. You're not lacking discipline. You are thoughtful, aware. You're paying attention to the world around you, and that awareness has made you cautious. You've watched people build something beautiful and then get torn apart online. You've watched businesses get boycotted for one sentence taken out of context. You've watched leaders apologize for things they never intended, or families dragged into messes that they never signed up for. And you quietly told yourself, yeah, I don't want that. So instead of stepping forward, you stepped back. Instead of building out loud, you built ideas in your head. Instead of launching, you waited. And at first, waiting felt responsible. It felt wise and mature. But now time's passed. And that dream is still in there. That restlessness is still there. That pull hasn't gone away. That's because calling doesn't dissolve just because you ignore it. This is where so many people misunderstand fear. Fear doesn't always like panic. Sometimes fear feels like overthinking. It feels like endless preparation. Sometimes it disguises itself as, I'll just do it later. But in the Bible, fear often shows up the same way. Moses didn't say, I'm terrified. He said, yeah, I'm not a good speaker. He tried to logic his way out of obedience, but God responded in Exodus 4, not by agreeing with Moses' assessment, but by reminding him who created his mouth. God did not remove Moses' fear. He told him to move anyway. Gideon didn't say, I don't trust you. He said, I'm the least of the least. He reduced himself so God wouldn't choose him. God called him a mighty warrior before Gideon ever felt like one. Judges 6 shows us that God speaks identity before behavior. Jeremiah said he was too young. Esther feared for her life. Mary risked her reputation. Peter denied Jesus publicly. Paul carried a past that followed him everywhere. None of these people stepped into purpose feeling ready. They stepped into trembling, uncertainty, and still obedient. Scripture never promises that obedience will feel safe. It promises that God will be present. This is important when it comes to hate and negativity because the Bible is very honest about that too. Jesus said plainly that you will be hated for standing in truth. Not maybe, not sometimes, but will be. So when negativity shows up, it is not proof that you are wrong. It is often confirmation that you are visible. The mistake many people make is assuming that every negative comment deserves their emotional energy, and it doesn't. One of the healthiest things you can learn as a leader, business owner, or advocate is how to respond internally without reacting externally. And I think we've all failed here, and that's okay. Once we know better, do better. You don't need to clap back to prove strength. You don't need to explain yourself to protect your integrity. You don't need to win arguments to win impact. Sometimes the strongest response is continued alignment. Sometimes the most powerful statement is consistency. Sometimes silence is not weakness, it's discipline. Think about this practically. When someone comments negatively online, what are they actually asking for? Attention, engagement, validation, power. You do not owe any of those things. You owe your energy to the people you are called to serve. You owe your presence to the life you are stewarding. That is where compartmentalization becomes a spiritual skill. You are allowed to say that voice does not get access to my heart. You are allowed to say that opinion does not get a seat at my table. You are allowed to say that criticism does not outrank the calling in my life. David did not pause to debate Goliath. Jesus did not stop to correct every Pharisee. Nehemiah did not climb down from the wall to answer his critics. He said plainly, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. That verse matters for you. You are doing a great work and you cannot afford to come down every time someone shouts from below. Now let's talk about everyday life, not just history and scripture. You might be the mom who wants to start a business from home, but is afraid people will judge her for wanting more. You might be the entrepreneur who wants to pivot into purpose-driven work, but fears losing income or respect. You might be the advocate who wants to speak about something hard but worries about backlash. These fears are real, but so is the cost of never trying. What happens if you don't move? You stay safe but stagnant. You stay uncomfortable but unfulfilled. You avoid the criticism, but you also avoid the impact. And one day the question won't be, what if they hate me? It will be, what if I never became who I was called to be? This is why Dream Doers exist. Not to hype you up, not to push you recklessly, but to remind you that faith requires movement. Dream doers are not people who wait for perfect conditions. They move with wisdom. They build with intention. They understand that courage is not loud, it is consistent. And now I want to close this the right way. If you've been listening to this episode and feeling that quiet conviction in your chest, that tug that says, okay, this is for me, don't ignore it. You don't have to overhaul your life today. You don't have to announce anything publicly. You don't have to explain yourself. You just have to take one obedient step. Send the email, register the business, write the outline, make the call, have the hard conversation, move. Because God equips the called, and He equips them as they move. One of my favorite quotes, and I have said this before in one of my episodes, is that it's easier to steer a moving ship than one that's sitting in the sand. Let God be your captain. I've said it since episode 1. God is my captain. He is steering. He's pushing us overboard. He's sinking the boat. And if you're on a journey with Him, then you can't go wrong. So, Dream Doer, this is your invitation. Don't just listen. Don't just dream. Go do. Build the thing. Serve the people. Leave the legacy. I hope this resonated with you. If it did, please leave a comment and let us know what your dream is that you're wanting to build. Let us know the fears that you've conquered or what you got out of this episode. Share it with a friend. Make sure to subscribe, and we will see you in the next episode.